there was another major landmark bill that was passed by Parliament, this time in the Rajya Sabha too, the Sustainable Harnessing and Advancement of Nuclear Energy for Transforming India Bill 2025, or the SHANTI Bill.
This bill now confronts us with a disappointing reversal, as a vision that once expanded horizons gives way to ambiguity, deepens uncertainty as to whether and where India's nuclear power framework is really headed.
The government of India has pushed a very important bill in the parliament in the ongoing winter session, the SHANTI Bill. So let's quickly break down the provisions of the bill and what does it entail, and we'll carry out a critical assessment of the SHANTI Bill. SHANTI stands for Sustainable Harnessing and Advancement of Nuclear Energy for Transforming India. The Modi government has a penchant for acronyms, the two very clever acronyms. So this is a bill focusing on the nuclear energy sector, the civilian nuclear sector. The bill proposes to repeal two very important laws: the Atomic Energy Act of 1962, which until now provided the legislative and the regulatory framework for atomic energy in the country. It's because of the Atomic Energy Act that the nuclear sector was treated as a public sector. Only government entities could play a role in the nuclear sector with no scope for private participation. And the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board and the Atomic Energy Commission, they draw their powers from this law, and they are the regulators of the nuclear sector. So the nuclear sector in India, the nuclear energy sector, was entirely government owned, government controlled, government regulated under the provisions of this old law. Then we also had the Civil Liability for Nuclear Damages Act of 2010. The law which provided for compensation to the victims of a nuclear disaster. If nuclear power plants are set up, if an accident or a tragedy occurs, in that case, who will pay for the compensation to the victims? To decide the liability, this law was enacted with the parliament, the Civil Liability for Nuclear Damage Act 2010. So these two laws are being repealed by the SHANTI Bill. The SHANTI Bill, once it becomes a law, it's going to replace these two legislations. Now, let me explain the focus on the nuclear energy sector in India. These points are very, very important. India has very ambitious plans for nuclear energy. Because see, nuclear energy is clean and relatively safe. Though there is a big risk of nuclear accidents occurring, due to the advancement in technology, it is considered as a relatively safer technology today, and it is highly clean technology, right? And it's not something which will get exhausted very soon. Though not exactly renewable, but it does fall under the bracket because of the longevity of uranium and the clean nature of the industry, right? The lack of emissions. It is perfect for decarbonizing your economy, to replace your coal-based thermal power plants. So in our energy basket, if you look at the diversification of our energy sources, nuclear energy today occupies a significant share in India's energy basket. India's ambition is to have 100 gigawatts of nuclear energy by 2047. 2047 is when India hopes to become a Viksit developed Bharat. By then, the goal is to have 100 gigawatts of installed capacity in nuclear sector. As of today, 3% of our electricity is coming from nuclear power plants. According to data from 2024-2025, 3% of the total electricity which is being produced in our country is coming from nuclear energy. So the plan is to scale up investments in nuclear power plants. And recently, the government has started prioritizing small modular reactors. In the recent budget, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has rolled out a dedicated program with dedicated funding and incentives to promote the rollout of small modular reactors in the country, to decentralize nuclear power plants. And by 2033, the goal is to have at least 5 to 6 small modular reactors which become operational in the country. So, to enable this, the government is looking at private sector participation in the nuclear energy sector, and it is liberalizing the nuclear energy industry. The stranglehold the government had on nuclear sector is being liberalized with a role for private sector being envisioned. So under the Shanti Bill, though the sector would be regulated by the public sector, there is a push for joint ventures and public private partnerships with private industries, with private players. Most likely, the preference would be for domestic private players to invest in nuclear plants, to procure fuel from abroad, and to operate the nuclear plants in the country. So, a role for private players is being envisioned in the Shanti Bill. Though the sector will be regulated by the public sector, private entities can collaborate, enter into joint ventures with public entities like Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited, and set up public private partnership projects to help bring private capital and technology, to mobilize more capital and technology. So there is a scope for foreign investment as well, but most likely preference would be for domestic private players to play a bigger role. The foreign involvement would be most likely in the form of technology, fuel, and reactor technology. So India would try to create a framework where foreign vendors and equipment manufacturers will supply the reactors and technology to India. And we have civil nuclear deals with many countries to ensure uranium supply as well. So most likely foreign involvement might be limited to that, with some projects being handed over to foreign entities, like how Russia is building the Kundun nuclear operators to set up their plants in India and operate their plants in the country. So maybe there will be a carving out of the space for some foreign involvement, but greater preference for domestic private players with overall control by the public sector. This is the structure being envisioned under the Shanti Bill. Now, under the Shanti Bill, apart from the liberalization and the greater role for private sector, there are some concerns which have come up, especially with regard to nuclear liability. In the event of a nuclear tragedy, in the event of a nuclear disaster, what will happen? Who will be liable for the damages and the compensation? Not just for compensating victims, but even for remediating the environmental damage. Right? The environment ecosystem will suffer significant damage, which will require significant investments to remediate in the long term. So, who will pay for this? Who will be held accountable? Now, to understand this, first we have to look at the Civil Liability Nuclear Damage Act of 2010. What provisions did it contain? See, when it comes to nuclear liability, there is an international standard established by the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA. The IAEA has a set of standards with regard to civil liability, and IAEA recommends that there should be a maximum cap on the liability of the operator and the supplier, meaning they can't be opened for unlimited liability. So let's say a foreign company like Westinghouse or General Electric, they have supplied a reactor to India, and there is an unfortunate accident after many years. Now, it would be incorrect to hold the supplier accountable for an operational error or for a natural disaster, maybe. And what if there was no intent to commit such negligence? Right? Do accidents do happen? So, keeping that in mind and to encourage greater private participation, IAEA has kept the standard that there should be a capping limit with regard to what is the liability that operator will pay, to what extent supplier would be made liable, and rest of it should be taken by the concerned government. Beyond a certain limit, liability will not be on operator or supplier. It will be on the concerned government. This is what IAEA expects. The then Manmohan Singh government was willing to be aligned with IAEA standards. Though India had made a big commitment under the India-US nuclear deal, right? Part of the deal was that US companies would be encouraged to invest in India. French companies would also enter India's nuclear sector. So to enable the foreign involvement to scale up our nuclear sector, we had to abide by the global standards, the IAEA standards. And the government was willing to do that. But when the bill was proposed in the parliament, it was very strongly opposed by almost all the political parties. Why? Because of India's experience, the Bhopal gas tragedy, one of the world's largest industrial disaster, where the operator of the plant was hardly held liable, and eventually the victims had to suffer. Even today, they are running around pillar and post to get their compensation. So given the experience of the Bhopal gas tragedy, there was a lot of political pressure, and the bill was amended at the last minute. The amendment was done in such a way that it has placed a higher degree of liability on the operator of the plant, and a legal recourse is provided where the supplier of the equipment can be sued for additional compensation. Now, this is not recommended by IAEA. If there is a legal recourse available, if victims can sue not just the operator for more compensation beyond the given limit, if they can also sue the supplier, then this could become a big disincentive for the operators and the suppliers. They will not even enter the sector. One reason why American and French companies have still not set up a nuclear plant in India, despite all the agreements, is because of this law, because it was not aligned with global standards. But the parliament felt it was necessary to protect Indians, ensure there is greater compensation to them in case of a nuclear tragedy, to hold these operators and suppliers accountable if the tragedy occurs. So there was a mismatch between India's legislation and the global standards, and this became a trade barrier, a barrier for foreign nuclear suppliers to play a role in India's nuclear market. So there has been a lot of pressure from US and other countries to simplify this law and meet the global standards so that they can sell nuclear technology to India. And that is what the Shanti Bill is seeking to do. Some are praising the bill for simplifying the liability norms and meeting the global standards. But there is criticism as well, because this would make Indians vulnerable in case of a nuclear event, in case of a nuclear disaster. Under the new bill, liability is being capped by the government at 3,000 crores. And that too only for the operator of the plant. Supplier will not be liable in case of a nuclear disaster. There are exceptions. I'll explain the exceptions. But in case of a nuclear tragedy, supplier will not be automatically liable to pay any compensation. Up to 3,000 crore compensation will be paid by the operator of the plant. Beyond this, if compensation has to be given, then government will bear the compensation. Any excess liability will be borne by the government, which means taxpayers' money will be used to compensate. That is where the criticism comes up. What if a supplier had been negligent in the design and manufacturing of the plant? And what if that led to a tragedy? Right? So there is a recourse which is given, but this is dependent on a contract being signed between supplier and operator. If at all operator has a pre-existing contract with supplier, which states that if there is a negligence on the part of the supplier or a deliberate intent to cause a nuclear disaster, or if supplier has agreed to pay some compensation, only then supplier can be held liable. Only then victims can sue the supplier for additional compensation if there is a contract between operator and supplier, or else supplier is completely immune. Even if there is a defect or negligence on the supplier's part, they will not be held liable for compensation. Only operator will pay up to 3,000 crores, which is obviously not enough. Rest of it will be paid by government using taxpayers' money. This is where the criticism comes up, that we are weakening the liability standards. But the counter argument is that this will bring our liability law in line with global standards of IAEA. This will allow foreign players to play a role. One reason why foreign players are not entering Indian market is because they are worried about the liability that they'll get opened up to. So the government is trying to simplify the regime and encourage greater foreign participation. But the concern remains that in case of a nuclear disaster, victims will again face the brunt. Taxpayers' money will be used to compensate, even if there has been a mistake by the supplier or the operator, because the maximum cap is 3,000 crores. The bill does recommend insurance and financial security, but this has to be arranged by the operator. This is mandatory. The operator of a plant should mandatorily get insurance and ensure financial security of the company. But again, supplier has no other obligation apart from this. Only if there is a contract between operator and supplier, only then supplier can be held accountable and a legal recourse can be taken by the victims to sue the supplier. Or else there is no way you can hold the supplier accountable. Then coming to the security of our nuclear cycle, because nuclear material can be easily leaked and diverted and proliferated towards weapons technology, right? That's where the government is keeping a tight control over the supply chain. In the bill, if you look at the provisions with regard to the fuel cycle and with regard to the management of the entire fuel supply chain, government will hold full control. Private sector will only be given a limited role, only to set up a plant, operate it, generate electricity. Rest of it, especially the fuel part of it, would be entirely under the sector control of the public sector. So this is good with regard to our non-proliferation commitment. With regard to non-proliferation standards, the bill has sufficient safeguards to prevent nuclear material from falling into the wrong hands. Then finally, one last concern is the independence and autonomy of our regulators in the nuclear sector. See, the regulators in the sector are Atomic Energy Commission, Atomic Energy Regulatory Board, but they are all controlled by the government itself. Their appointments and every other aspect of the functioning of these regulatory bodies is controlled entirely by the government. So this represents a conflict of interest. Usually in countries, you have independent regulators in nuclear sector, which are autonomous from the government. But in the case of India, the regulators are controlled by the government. It's part of the government itself. So this is one issue which has not been addressed by the bill, and experts are criticizing this. The lack of regulatory independence is being criticized. So this is the short analysis of the Shanti Bill, and please take up this mains practice question.